In a time before memory, before stories were told, before even the sky had learned its place, the world belonged to beings far older than gods. They were not worshipped, they were not questioned. They simply were the Titans, massive in presence, endless in power. Their footsteps shaped mountains, their voices carried across oceans, and above them all stood a ruler who believed his reign would never end. Cronus, a king who had already defeated his own father to claim the throne, a king who understood one truth better than anyone else. Power is never permanent. And because of that, he feared losing it more than anything. Cronus did not begin as a tyrant. No ruler ever truly does. There was a time, long before fear took root, when he stood not as a king, but as a son who looked upon his father and saw something broken, something cruel, and like many who come before him, he believed he could do better, he believed he could rule differently. But power as a way of changing those who hold it. Long before Cronus sat upon the throne, the world was ruled by another, his father, a being as vast as the sky itself. And yet, even something so immense could fall. Cronus had learned this truth early, not through stories, but through action. He had risen against his own father. He had taken the throne not because he was destined to, but because he chose to. And in doing so, he proved something dangerous. A son can overthrow his father, and so, when the prophecy came, it did not feel impossible. It felt familiar, like a shadow returning. The words echoed in his mind again and again, "You will be overthrown by your own child. Not if, not maybe, but will be." And that was enough. The day his first child was born, the halls of Olympus should have been filled with joy. A new life, a continuation of legacy, a future, but instead, there was silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Rhea held the child gently, her eyes searching Cronus's face, hoping, praying that he would choose differently. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with something far more powerful. Hope. Cronus said nothing. He simply stepped forward and extended his hands. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Even the wind held its breath. He looked down at the child. Small, fragile, completely unaware of the fear it had already created. And in that moment, Cronus had a choice: to trust fate or to fight it. Slowly, without anger, without hesitation, he opened his mouth and swallowed the child whole. No scream, no struggle, only silence. And just like that, the first piece of his future was gone. But one child was never going to be enough. The prophecy did not say which one, and so every child became a threat. The second was taken, the third, the fourth. Each time, the same silence filled the air. Each time, Rhea's hope weakened. And with every child that disappeared, Cronus grew more certain. He was winning, he was in control. He was safe. But there are wounds that power cannot hide, and there is grief that silence cannot bury. Rhea no longer cried, not because she had no tears left, but because something inside her had changed. She had watched life be taken from her again and again, and now she understood something that Cronus did not. Fear does not stop fate, it only delays it. Time passed, and once again Rhea carried a child. But this time something was different. She did not feel fear. She did not feel helpless. She felt determined. Because this time she would not watch her child disappear. This time she would act. The plan was simple, but simplicity can be the most powerful thing of all. She would leave, not openly, not loudly, but quietly, carefully. She would take the child far from Cronus's reach. hide him where no king could see. And when the time came, she would return not with fear, but with a storm. And so, as the final child prepared to enter the world, fate began to move once more. Not loudly, not suddenly, but steadily, because some things cannot be stopped. They can only be delayed. And far beyond the reach of Cronus, beyond the fear, beyond the silence, a storm was about to be born. The night Zeus was born, the world did not celebrate. No horn sounded, no songs rose into the sky, no palace doors opened in joy. Instead, there was silence, a deep, careful silence, the kind of silence that belongs to secrets. Rhea moved through the darkness with steady steps. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was clear. She knew Cronus would be watching. She knew every shadow could betray her. She knew one mistake would cost her everything. But still, she walked. Because in her arms, wrapped in soft cloth, was the child fate had chosen. Zeus, the child who should have been afraid, but was not. The child who should have cried, but remained calm. As if even then the storm inside him understood it must wait. Rhea stopped beneath the open sky. For a moment, she looked down at her newborn son. His eyes were closed. His breathing was soft. His tiny hands rested against the cloth around him. He looked ordinary, fragile, small, mortal, almost. But Rhea knew better. She had felt something when he was born, not thunder, not lightning, something quieter, a pressure in the air, a stillness before a storm. She lowered her face close to his and whispered, "You must live." Her voice broke slightly, not for power, not for revenge, but because the world has forgotten what freedom feels like. The baby stirred gently in her arms. Rhea closed her eyes. "One day, you will understand why I had to leave you." Then she kissed his forehead. And with that, she carried him farther into the night, far beyond the halls of Cronus, far beyond the eyes of the Titans. There was a place wrapped in stone and shadow, a sacred cave hidden within the mountains. Its entrance was narrow, its walls were ancient, its depths were quiet. To most it was nothing, just another wound in the side of the earth. But to Rhea, it was hope. She stepped inside. The air was cool, the stone beneath her feet was damp. Somewhere deep within the cave, water dripped slowly into darkness. Drop after drop after drop. It sounded almost like time itself. Rhea walked until she reached the deepest chamber. There, sheltered from wind and sky, she placed Zeus gently upon a bed of soft coverings. He opened his eyes, and for one quiet moment, mother and child looked at each other. No words were needed, because love sometimes speaks loudest in silence. Rhea was not alone. There were beings who still remembered kindness, beings who had not bowed completely to fear. Some came from the mountains, some from the forests, some from places older than the throne of Cronus. They gathered around the child in silence, not because he was king, not yet, but because he was a chance for the world to change. One guardian stepped forward and bowed his head. "We will keep him hidden." Another said, "No sound will reach Cronus." Rhea looked at them, her eyes full of pain and gratitude. "He must never know," she whispered. "If Cronus finds him," she could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Everyone in that cave understood. The child's life depended on secrecy, and secrecy would become his first kingdom. But hiding Zeus was only half of the plan. Cronus would expect a child. Cronus would demand proof. Cronus would not be satisfied with silence. So Rhea prepared the lie that would save the truth. She found a stone, not too large, not too small, heavy enough to feel real in the arms, cold enough to remind her of what Cronus had become. She wrapped it in cloth, the same way she had wrapped her child, layer after layer, fold after fold, until from a distance it looked like a newborn. Rhea held it against her chest. Her arms remembered Zeus, but now they carried stone, and somehow that felt even heavier. When Rhea returned to Cronus, the halls were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that listens. Cronus sat upon his throne, his face unreadable, shadows stretched behind him. His eyes followed her every step. Rhea kept her breathing calm, she kept her hands steady, but inside, every part of her was screaming. Cronus looked at the bundle in her arms. "The child," he said. His voice was low, not angry, not sad, just certain. Rhea stepped forward. "Yes," she answered softly. Cronus stood. Each step he took echoed through the hall. Rhea felt the weight of the stone in her arms. She felt the weight of the stone in her arms. She felt the weight of the lie, and beneath it all, she felt the weight of hope. Cronus reached for the bundle. For a single moment, his hand paused. Rhea's heart nearly stopped. Did he know? Could he feel the difference? Could fear make a king wise? Cronus stared at the cloth, then at Rhea. "You are quiet," he said. Rhea lowered her eyes. "I have lost many children. It was not a lie. And because it was true, it sounded true." Cronus looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the bundle from her arms. Rhea forced herself not to reach for it. Forced herself not to tremble. Forced herself not to tremble. Forced herself not to look afraid. Cronus lifted the wrapped stone, and just as he had done before, he swallowed it whole. The prophecy he believed had been defeated again. But far away, deep inside a hidden cave, the real child still breathed. Cronus returned to his throne, his shoulders relaxed. His eyes lost a little of their sharpness. For the first time in many nights, he looked almost calm. "It is done," he said. Rhea said nothing. She only bowed her head. But inside her chest, something powerful moved. Not joy. Joy would have been too dangerous. Not relief. Relief would have made her careless. It was something quieter, a small flame, protected from the wind, hidden from the dark, still alive. Cronus believed he had swallowed his future, but he had swallowed only stone, and fate had slipped through his hands. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Deep in the mountain cave, Zeus grew. The world outside remained dangerous. Cronus still ruled. Titans still obeyed. Fear still sat upon the throne. But inside the cave, life continued. Zeus was cared for in secrecy. His cries were hidden by music. His laughter was swallowed by the echoes of stone. When he moved, guardians watched. When he slept, the cave seemed to breathe with him. He did not know the danger around him. Not yet. He did not know that his father had tried to destroy him. He did not know that his brothers and sisters were trapped in darkness. He did not know that the world waited for him. He only knew warmth, voices, shadows, and the distant sound of thunder. The first storm came when Zeus was still young. Rain fell over the mountain. Wind moved through the trees. Clouds gathered like great beasts above the world. Inside the cave, the guardians grew uneasy. Storms were common, but this one felt strange. The thunder did not roll away. It lingered, as if waiting at the entrance of the cave. Zeus sat near the stone wall, listening. Each rumble made his eyes widen. Not with fear, with recognition. A guardian knelt beside him. "Does it frighten you?" Zeus shook his head slowly. The thunder sounded again, deep, soft, powerful. Zeus placed his tiny hand against the cave wall, and for a moment the stone trembled, not from the storm outside, but from the storm within him. Zeus was not like other children. He did not simply hear the world, he listened to it. He listened to the wind moving across the mountain. He listened to water sliding through cracks in the stone. He listened to the silence between thunder, and slowly the world began to answer. When he was calm, the air inside the cave grew still. When he was sad, clouds gathered above the mountain. When anger touched him, faint sparks crawled across the stone walls. The guardians saw it. They spoke of it only in whispers. He is awakening. Too soon? No. Another answered, not too soon, just as fate intended. Rhea could not visit often. Every journey was dangerous. Every absence could be questioned. Every look from Cronus could become suspicion. So she waited, she endured. She smiled when she had to. She stood beside Cronus like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, because somewhere beyond his reach, her son was alive. Sometimes, when the palace grew quiet, Rhea would look toward the mountains. She would imagine Zeus sleeping, growing, learning. She would imagine the day he would ask who he was, and she feared that day, because truth is heavy, and Zeus would one day have to carry all of it. Years passed. Zeus grew from a child into a boy, stronger, taller, quieter. His eyes carried questions now, questions the guardians could no longer avoid. One evening, as the sun lowered beyond the mountain, Zeus sat near the cave entrance. The sky burned orange and gold. He watched birds move freely across the horizon. After a long silence, he asked, "Why must I stay hidden?" The guardian beside him did not answer immediately. Zeus turned. "I am not a baby anymore." The guardian sighed. "No, you are not." "Then why?" Zeus asked. "Why do I live in stone while the sky calls to me?" The guardian looked toward the darkening clouds. "Because there is someone who fears what you will become." Zeus was silent. Then, softly, he asked, "Who?" The guardian closed his eyes. "Your father." The word struck Zeus harder than thunder. Father. He had heard the word before, but never like this. Never with fear attached to it. "My father," Zeus repeated. The guardian nodded. "Cronus." Zeus looked back toward the sky. The name felt strange in his mind. Heavy, cold. Why would my father fear me? The guardian's voice became softer. "Because fate said you would rise." Zeus did not move. The wind outside the cave grew stronger. "Rise against him." "Yes." Zeus looked down at his hands. Small sparks flickered between his fingers. And did he try to stop it? The guardian hesitated. Zeus saw the hesitation. And in that silence, he understood there was more. "Tell me," Zeus said. His voice was no longer soft. The guardian lowered his head. "You were not the first child of Cronus and Rhea." Zeus looked up. "There were others?" "Yes." "Where are they?" The cave became very quiet. Even the wind seemed to pull away from the entrance. "Cronus swallowed them," the guardian said. Zeus stared at him. "Swallowed to prevent the prophecy." Zeus stood slowly. His breathing changed. The air around him grew colder. "Are they dead?" "No," the guardian answered. "Not dead. Trapped." Zeus looked toward the distant palace he had never seen. For the first time in his life, the storm inside him did not feel distant. It felt awake. Zeus said nothing for a long time. The guardian feared he had spoken too much. But truth, once released, cannot return to silence. Finally, Zeus asked, "Does my mother know I live?" The guardian nodded. "She is the reason you live." Zeus closed his eyes. He saw no memory of her face, only warmth, only a voice from somewhere deep in his beginning. "You must live." Slowly, Zeus opened his eyes. "Then I will not waste the life she saved." Above the mountain, thunder rolled softly. Zeus looked at the sky, not as a child anymore, but as someone beginning to understand his place in the world. "If my brothers and sisters are trapped," he paused, "then one day I will free them." That night, Zeus did not sleep easily. He lay beneath the stone ceiling of the cave, listening to the world outside. The wind, The rain, the distant voice of thunder, everything sounded different now. The cave was no longer only a home, it was a hiding place. His childhood was no longer only a childhood, it was preparation, and Cronus was no longer only a name. He was the shadow waiting at the end of Zeus's path. But Zeus did not tremble. He did not cry. He simply looked into the darkness and listened as the storm inside him whispered one truth again and again: not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, but soon. The night after the truth was spoken, the cave felt different. Not colder, not darker, but heavier, as if the walls themselves now carried secrets too large to contain. Zeus lay awake, his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling above him. He listened, not to the dripping water, not to the wind beyond the cave, but to something deeper, something within himself. The knowledge of who he was had not brought fear, it had brought clarity. It had brought clarity, and clarity is often the beginning of change. He raised his hands slowly into the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint spark flickered across his fingertips. Small, quiet, but alive. Zeus watched it closely, not as a child would watch something strange, but as someone recognizing something familiar. The spark did not burn him. It did not resist him. It followed him, as if it had been waiting for him to notice it. Slowly he closed his hand. The spark disappeared, but its presence remained, not outside him, but within. By morning the guardians had already noticed the change. Zeus did not speak as he usually did. He did not move with the same quiet curiosity. There was something else now, something steady, focused. One of the elders approached him carefully. "You did not sleep," he said. Zeus shook his head. "No, because of what you learned." Zeus looked toward the cave entrance, where light began to creep in. "Because of what I understand now." The elder watched him closely. "Understanding can be dangerous," he said. Zeus turned back, so his hiding. The words were calm, but they carried weight. The elder felt it, and for the first time he realized something important. Zeus was no longer just a child being protected. He was becoming something that could not be contained. Later that day, Zeus stepped outside the cave alone. The air felt different on his skin. The sky stretched endlessly above him. Clouds drifted slowly, unaware of the storm they would soon carry. Zeus walked forward until he stood at the edge of the mountain path. He closed his eyes and listened. Not with his ears, but with something deeper. The wind brushed against him, then slowed. The clouds above him shifted, then gathered. The air itself seemed to pause, as if waiting, as if recognizing him. Zeus opened his eyes and raised his hand toward the sky. At first, there was only silence. Then, the clouds darkened, not violently, not suddenly, but deliberately. A low rumble echoed across the sky. Zeus did not flinch. He did not step back. He stood still and reached higher. The air crackled faintly. A thin line of light appeared between the clouds. It flickered, uncertain, searching. Then, in a single instant, it struck downward. Not with destruction, but with recognition. The lightning touched Zeus's hand. And instead of burning, it bent. It curved around his fingers, wrapping itself like something alive. Zeus inhaled slowly. The power did not overwhelm him. It did not resist him. It answered him. The guardians rushed from the cave, drawn by the sound. They stopped when they saw him. Zeus stood at the edge of the mountain, lightning dancing across his hand. The sky above him pulsed with energy. The wind circled him, not as a threat, but as something responding. One guardian whispered, "It has begun." Another stepped back slowly. No, it was always going to begin. They watched in silence, because what stood before them was no longer just the child they had hidden. It was the storm learning its own name. Zeus lowered his hand slowly. The lightning faded. The clouds softened. The wind drifted away, as if the world itself respected the command. He turned back toward the cave. The guardians stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Zeus walked past them calmly, not proud, not surprised, certain. He stopped near the entrance. "This is why I was hidden," he said quietly. No one answered, because they all knew he was right. That night Zeus sat alone once again, but this time he was not listening for answers. He already had them. He thought of Cronus, the father he had never known, the king who feared him, the one who had swallowed his brothers and sisters, the one who believed himself untouchable. Zeus closed his eyes. He felt the spark again, not outside, but inside him, and slowly he spoke, not loudly, not in anger, but with absolute certainty. "I will not stay hidden." The next morning, Zeus stood before the guardians. There was no hesitation in his voice. "I am leaving." The cave fell silent. One of the elders stepped forward. "You are not ready." Zeus looked at him calmly. "Then I will become ready. Cronus will destroy you," another said. Zeus shook his head slightly. He already tried. The words struck harder than any argument. No one spoke for a moment. Then the elder said quietly, "If you leave, there is no returning to this life." Zeus looked back at the cave, the place that had protected him, the place that had hidden him, the place that had shaped him. Then he turned away. "I was never meant to stay." Zeus walked down the mountain path alone. No army, no weapon, no crown, only purpose. The wind followed him, not strong, but present. The clouds moved slowly above, as if watching, as if waiting. Every step he took brought him closer to the world he had never seen, and closer to the father who had tried to erase him. Far away, in the halls of power, something shifted. Cronus sat upon his throne. The room was quiet. The air was still. But something felt different. He frowned slightly, not in fear, not yet, but in awareness, as if somewhere beyond his sight, something had begun to move, something he could not control, something he had believed no longer existed. Zeus continued walking, step by step, leaving behind the only life he had ever known, moving toward a future he could not yet see, but could already feel. The sky darkened slightly above him, not with danger, but with anticipation, because the storm was no longer hidden. It was no longer waiting. It was rising, and soon the world would witness what happens when fate finally takes its first step. The world was larger than Zeus had imagined, not just in size, but in weight. Every step he took beyond the mountain carried something new: voices, movement, life. He passed through lands that lived under the shadow of power, villages where people spoke quietly, where eyes lowered when the sky darkened, where fear existed, even when nothing was happening. Zeus did not announce himself. He did not reveal what he was. He simply observed, and what he saw confirmed everything. The world was not balanced, it was controlled, and control is not the same as order. Everywhere he went, one name returned again and again: Cronus, spoken carefully, sometimes in fear, sometimes in anger, but never freely. Zeus listened closely. He learned how Cronus ruled, not through chaos, but through certainty, through control, through the belief that nothing could challenge him. And that belief was the weakness Zeus needed. Power alone would not be enough. Zeus understood this quickly. He could summon lightning, he could command the sky. But Cronus was not just powerful, he was careful. And to defeat something careful, required something more than strength. It required patience. It required thought. It required a plan. Zeus stopped near a quiet river one evening. The water moved slowly, reflecting the sky above. He looked into it, not to see his reflection, but to think. "If I face him now," he whispered, "I lose." The words were calm, honest, and because of that they were powerful. Zeus did not rush forward. He waited, because waiting is what storms do best. Instead of marching toward Cronus, Zeus turned away, not in fear, but in strategy, because before he could fight, he needed allies. And before he could claim the sky, he needed to understand the world beneath it. He traveled further, through forests that whispered with ancient voices, across valleys where silence felt older than memory, and slowly the world began to recognize him, not by name, not yet, but by presence. The wind lingered around him, the clouds followed him. The air itself seemed to shift when he passed. It did not take long for others to notice. There were beings who had suffered under Cronus's rule, beings who had been pushed aside, forgotten, controlled. One by one they approached him, not with loyalty, not with trust, but with curiosity. "Who are you?" one asked. Zeus did not answer immediately. He looked at them, measured them, and then said quietly, "Someone who intends to change everything." They did not believe him at first, but belief is not required for truth to exist. And slowly, that truth began to grow. When Zeus finally approached the domain of Cronus, he did not come as a challenger. He came as something far more dangerous, a stranger, unknown, unnoticed. The palace stood tall, carved from power and fear. Its walls did not welcome. They watched. Zeus stepped forward without hesitation, not as a son returning, but as a presence entering. Guards stood at the entrance, their eyes narrowed. "State your purpose." Zeus met their gaze calmly. "I seek to serve." The words felt strange but necessary, because sometimes the path to power begins with humility. Zeus entered the palace of his enemy, the place where his brothers and sisters were imprisoned, the place where his father believed himself safe. He walked through the halls slowly, taking in every detail, every shadow, every movement, every weakness. And deep within, something inside him grew stronger. Not anger, not yet purpose. The moment came without warning. Zeus stood in the great hall, and there, upon the throne, sat Cronus. For the first time, father and son stood within the same space, and neither one knew it fully. Cronus looked down at him. His presence filled the room. "You are new," he said. Zeus bowed slightly. "Yes. Why are you here?" Zeus lifted his head. His voice remained calm, controlled. "To serve where I am needed." Cronus studied him for a moment. Something almost flickered in his expression, but it passed. "Then serve," he said. And just like that, Zeus stepped into the heart of his enemy's world, not as a warrior, not as a king, but as something far more dangerous. A patient storm. Days passed. Zeus remained quiet, observing, learning, waiting, because the moment had not yet come, but it was close. He could feel it. And when that moment arrived, everything would change. Zeus had not forgotten, not for a single moment. His brothers, his sisters, trapped within Cronus, alive but unseen. Freeing them would not be easy, but it was necessary, because this war would not be won alone. Zeus stood in silence one night, looking up at the dark ceiling of the palace. Soon, he whispered, and somewhere deep within Cronus, something stirred. The storm had risen, it had taken form, it had stepped into the world, but it had not yet struck. Zeus stood within the palace of his enemy, unseen for what he truly was, waiting, watching, preparing. because the next move would not just begin a battle, it would begin a war. And when that war came, the sky itself would take sides, and so the storm waits. Not in silence, but in patience. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter is coming. Zeus, the Titan War begins.